Okay, so in this video, we're going to be removing the intake so we can change out the thermostat housing. And obviously we can tell that the thermostat housing is broken back there by looking at the newer one we got to the older one. These rings are all corroded out of there from extended time and different heat and stuff. Now I've got a lot of tools here and a lot of this stuff isn't 100% necessary, but it's going to be helpful for you to know what I used inside the video to change these things. I've got an 8mm wrench, gear wrench, and a 10mm wrench. I've got a 8mm socket. I've got a T30 socket with a 1-inch extension and a 3-inch extension. This is going to be necessary most of the time for you to have this same kind of setup that I've got here, or a 4-inch extension, obviously. I've got a long breaker style 1/4-inch ratchet because there's some stuck bolts. I've got a electric 1/4-inch ratchet. I've got hose pliers to pull up the poppy pieces. Obviously you can get away with a pair of pliers, just a regular old pair of pliers, and a flathead screwdriver. I've got a pick tool. It comes in handy for releasing some of the stuff there. This tool right here is a coolant system pressurizer, and it pressurizes the coolant system. And you'll find out later on in the video when my wife is helping me out, this is pretty funny. You guys need to see that part. I've also got another pair of pliers, or them kind of pliers, to help me move that. With the pick tool that I'm going to use, I'm going to stick it in the side of the hose, break the seal that's made on the hose. And this tool right here helps you remove the hose clamps. I got a hammer that's for tapping on stuff. When I go to insert the Torx bit inside there, I want to make sure that I get it inside the Torx so I don't strip out none of these holes, because they're in bad places and definitely not easy to get to. I've got some penetrant there and some brake cleaner. Luckily, I got it off and taken care of. I'm going to show you folks how to do it. Remember, if anyone else can do it, I promise you can do it too, because old Clayboy is going to show you how. So we've got the hotties LR3 up in here, and we're going to remove this intake because we have a coolant leak, but we're going to do a couple different things in this video. Hopefully I'm going to show you how to burp this out. Now I don't have the Land Rover procedure for doing that, but I'm going to explain to you why I do it the way I do it. Whatever way that's going to be, I'll figure it out at the end of the video. We got a coolant leak underneath this intake, and I believe it to be this hose right here, and I don't think this hose is supposed to move around like that. So we're going to secure that, and we're going to start by removing your engine cover. You're going to need to remove your oil dipstick tube, and that quite simply comes off just like that. And then you'll remove 4, if I remember correctly, 10mm bolts. We're going to start removing this snorkel right here, and we need to get off little lines like this. So what you're going to do is you're going to pinch these two, and as you pinch them, you should be able to pull that line right off of there. So any lines that you come to like that are going to be done the same way. This one has a little clip on it right here, and we should be able to pull that off like that. Hopefully yours comes off as easy as this one did. And don't forget to put this rubber grommet back on here. But I'm going to start taking out these flathead screws right here and remove this airbox cover, so I can get down and start taking a closer look at the intake. Then we're going to pressurize this system and see if we can find the leak, because maybe it's not under the intake. Take out the Phillips screws that are surrounding our airbox right here, and we hopefully can remove this whole piece right here. We're going to need to disconnect our mass airflow sensor right here. If these connectors won't come off when you push down on the clip, push it forward, then pull it backwards. Okay, so now we're going to just put regular water in there. And as we fill up that water, we want to make sure this system fills up completely. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this, which will allow the air and the water to go into this chamber right here. We're also going to take this clamp off right here, and we're going to put water directly down inside the hose, because if we're having a coolant leak, then we need to make sure the system is as full as possible so we don't have to put as much air inside the system. Now we're going to wait till water starts to come out the other part of the intake as we fill this up. All right, so we got a little bit coming out of there. We can put the hose back on and put the clamp back on the engine. Okay, so now we want to check for a leak, and it's super simple. You can go down to your local auto parts store, AutoZone, O'Reilly, Advance, and you can rent the coolant leak tester, which will allow you to fit it right on there. Now, luckily me, I've got a system that allows me to use shop air, and I basically turn on this valve. Once my system is closed, I've closed off this. I've got this on here. I've got all of my hoses connected, and then all we do is we just sit and we find our leak. Now it looks like somebody went a little bit crazy with the old JB weld down there. Give that a little bit more pressure by turning that. And it's leaking somewhere, I just can't tell.
It's right here. Look at this.
Whoa, she's a squirter.
Don't be putting my personal information out there like that.
I didn't, but you just did. Okay, so sometimes you're going to have trouble getting the hoses off, and that's what a pick tool is used for. You take the pick tool and you slip it underneath the hose, and you just work it around, and it's going to break that seal that has happened over time, and then hopefully you can reach back and start wiggling that hose off. Then we got that hose off. Now, this was a little bit trickier to get this connector off of here. We had to take a pick tool and stick it up underneath there, because even though we were pressing the rocker, it wasn't coming off the little tang very easily. You could also take a screwdriver as you're holding down on the rocker and give it a little tug. You don't want to break the tip off there, because this needs to connect securely to the intake. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to have to remove the intake, because this goes out like a Y, and it's bolted down to the center down there, and whatever's leaking back there is going to be this whole plastic piece that somebody's already repaired. Luckily for me, one of the few things I have left over from the last engine I did in this LR3 was this piece, and it was just the Lord shining down on me and showing me that. But I'm going to start removing this intake. I'm going to go about getting the rest of the hoses off of it and disconnecting things to be able to remove it. Now, the reason that you can't remove this whole piece is because it's bolted on by 2 bolts over here on an inlet and 2 bolts over here, but the real problem is the one that goes down up underneath there. So we'll start taking this intake out, getting down to this part. Now, I want you to be really careful with these connectors right here, because we don't want to break this tube. So when you go to take these off of here, just squeeze very gently. You don't have to crush it down super bad, and start wiggling it, and it will come off. It doesn't take a whole lot of pressure to get them to come loose. Now, after examining this EGR system a little bit closer, we look down here and we see 2 bolts on the side of here, and we don't see any threads on these bolts. So I'm guessing that these bolts are more than likely going to break off. Hopefully these bolts don't break off, because then we're going to create a situation, but I'll show you how to fix it if we do. We're going to take an 8mm and try to take out these 2 bolts right down here, opposed to trying to take these ones out. Okay, so them bolts came right out, and hopefully we potentially avoided disaster by trying to take them other ones out. So now we'll move on to removing these 10mm bolts that are down the side of here. And you folks don't have anything to worry about. I'll show you what the bolts were and what hoses I took off. And I know this looks really, really serious, but trust me, folks, if I can do it, you can do it too, I promise you. Okay, so on each side, we have a total of 5 bolts running down it. And they're pretty easy to get to, with the exception of these last 2 bolts back here. Now, if we were going to get to them bolts, this bracket's going to be right in our way, but it's held on, in my situation, because this motor's been removed and replaced, 2 8mm bolts right down inside here. And then we should be able to push that bracket up out of the way. This is the fuel rail, and we can lift this off right off of here and pull it out of them tabs. Hopefully we can get that out of the way so we can go back to removing the 10mm bolts inside there. I've gotten all of these down here and they came out real easy, and hopefully this side works the same. Okay, back here on the passenger side, we've got another clip and it slides right over like that. And how the hell do you get it undone? Well, hopefully I don't have to take that stupid thing off. I just pulled it up out of the holder there so I could get down to the bolt. I can't figure out how that, I mean, I'm sure if I took a pick tool and stuff and I could get that off, but I couldn't figure out how the hell it was coming off. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove the oil filler neck. Down here, there's a little clip you need to move to the side. Don't break yours and think it's a Chevy like mine. Luckily, it does unscrew once you get the clip undone, and it's threaded, so we can set that off to the side. Then down here, I'm gonna remove these 8mm nuts that hold our bracket on, because they also hold our fuel injector connections there. And because it's a little bit narrow through here, I want them set off to the side. I don't think we have to disconnect any of the connectors from the side of here or anything like that. I think we could just flop it to the side once we get them off. I think we're taking it out. Oh, we're probably gonna have to disconnect all of the injectors and the fuel line to get this out of here, because I didn't realize, but the whole lower intake is coming up with the intake. Okay, so we want to disconnect all the injectors, and they actually came off pretty simple on the other side. All we do is push down on this tab right here and wiggle as we pull up on it, and each one of them seem to be coming off pretty simple. Seem to be. All right, so on the back side of here is a connector, and we'll push down on the connector, and I'll show you that right here. And remember, just to push it forward as you release it in the rocker. Whew,
here, babe.
Freaking hot.
You need this.
Oh, yeah, it's freaking 100 degrees out here. So we need to release the fuel out of here and disconnect the fuel line. It's pretty simple. It's common like General Motors and stuff. So we'll just take our fingers, we'll push that clip back, which will release that off of there. Okay, because this is a spring underneath here locking in this line, we're gonna spray it down with a little bit of penetrant. We're also gonna use a 5/8 tool, and hopefully we can get it to push that spring apart. How this works is this tip is graduated, so it'll push down and push the spring out, exposing it like this, allowing you to remove the line. The line will stick down inside the stainless steel fitting in there, but I would imagine this is going to be a little bit of work, and there's different styles of fuel line release tools. Also, I should mention that I did not release the fuel pressure. I'm going to pull it back slowly so it doesn't blow all over my face, but I did not see a fuel line pressure release on the fuel rail, but I really didn't care either, so no need to tell me 50,000 times where it's at. Now, I had a few hoses that I did not take off prior to doing this. I took this hose off of the EGR valve right here because it run right next to this hose right here, which I accidentally tore when I was taking it off. And then that way I didn't have to get them confused. If I would have took that off properly, it could have been a problem. Okay, so this has gotten downright silly removing this fuel line off of here. Talk about a stinking dime holding up a damn dollar. I went to the store, and because I couldn't find my fuel line release tools, which should have been 5/8, and I can't get it down in there, and that's because there's a clamp around here, and the only way to get that clamp to be undone would be to cut it, because it's right in the stinking way of putting the tool inside there. Then that would require that I use a high pressure hose clamp on here, and it kind of defeats the purpose. I would cut it up here if I was going to cut it anywhere, cut the clamp and put a high pressure hose up here, clamp fitting, but I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to talk about some other ways we could do this. One of the other ways that we could do this to be able to get this intake is separate the bottom, the upper intake, from the lower intake. Well, I don't want to really do that because then I need new gaskets. So, on to what I'm thinking right now, and that should be the safest possible. I'm going to remove this line off of here all the way completely, And I'm going to start disconnecting the electrical connectors. Now, once again, I had one of them electrical connectors that had the red rib in it. And the way that thing worked is I slid this back and I pushed down right here on this latch mechanism. Then I had to push it together and pull it apart sharply. And I got that off of there. Now I've got my electrical connector that's connected on this side. I'm going to have to take it off of these tabs, pull it off of here, which should allow my wiring harness to be separated from my intake, and then hopefully I can pick my intake up and just set it off to the side to do the work that I have. Now, I've already given you a couple ways that you can take the intake out completely. It's not necessary for me to do that as far as I can tell. The other thing is the wiring harness was attached to the back of here, and I had to lift it up and push it out of the way. That should allow me to either hold up the intake so I can get down to the new part that we need to put on, or if you want to cut that, go ahead and remove it, or remove it properly, which I know I've done in the past. I can't understand why that won't come out of there, but got other things to do, so got to get on with work. Okay, I've got it up. I didn't break anything. Another thing that we could have done was remove all of the injectors, but generally we'll break the clips on the holders up here, so I didn't really want to do that. The object for me to get this apart was without breaking anything and allow me to gain access down here so I could show you folks how to get all these screws out. Now we've got Torx bits down here and we need to get them out. So luckily, for some weird reason, I had this extra part at home. So that's super sweet. And it looks like my gaskets are good. So a little bit of dielectric on the gaskets, we should be good. But what's nice about this is having the part in front of us that shows us exactly where the bolts are and which ones we need to take off. Now we've got all the hoses disconnected from it with the exception of that electrical line, or at least I believe I do. And we need to get these Torx out. So we're gonna start taking them out and then remove this part. Now my impression when I was listening to it leak, she was squirting from right here, but I'm not so certain that she wasn't squirting from right there, judging by how this is, but we'll inspect it further when we get it out of there. Now, because these screws that are held down in there point straight up, and I don't want to strip them out, and I'm sure you don't at home, we're going to spray them down with some brake cleaner to hopefully free them up. Then we'll blow them out with some compressed air. Then we're going to grab a T30 Torx bit and we're going to remove them 4 screws. This is very, very important. These are notorious, and I mean notorious at stripping out. So make sure you put some penetrant down there and use the right tool. And because I've been to several rodeos just like this one, I take a hammer and I tap that Torx down inside there once I've sprayed it out. Now, I fill all of my valve holes with either a rag or some paper towel or something like that. The reason that I do that is you don't want anything dropping down inside the valves. The last thing you want is to take this intake up and have something drop down in there. And once I remove that paper towel after I'm all done, I'm going to take a vacuum and suck out each hole, because along the edges right here, you're going to see a bunch of dirt and stuff. And that stuff needs to come off of there, but it's inevitably going to fall down inside the engine, and more than likely it would just pass through. But what about if it had some kind of pebble or stone inside? That stuff's going to fall down inside them valves. And as long as it don't fall inside the pistons, I doubt you'll have any trouble whatsoever. Okay, so since I believe that the front lower bolt right down here is going to be the harder one to get to, I'm going to do it first and show you what I've got set up on here, because the upper bolt is really easy to see right there. I've got a 3-inch extension with a 1-inch extension and then a T30 socket, and that should fit down underneath this pipe right here. And I'm hoping that I can give you a little view of it down there. Now you can see that I'm on that screw right there. So this pipe right here is really affecting the way I can get on there. So I've got a 3-inch extension and 8mm, and I'm hopefully going to loosen these bolts up, and hopefully this pipe will flop out of my way so I can get to my T30 Torx on the front of this thing. Now, you're going to run into the fan if you keep doing that, so just loosen it up and pull your ratchet out. Now, that thing just flops around inside there, and we should be able to get to the other bolt once we pick up the screw that dropped down inside there and the T30 that dropped there earlier when I was pissed. Now, with the extension set up just the way I did, I just had just enough room to get up in there and loosen up that bolt. Now, I don't recommend using pneumatics to take out Torx, or at least once you get them loose, you can use a pneumatic. But what you'll do is you'll strip off the insides of the heads, and that's no fun, especially when it happens in the worst spot possible, which is the only place it generally ever happens. Now I've managed to get onto this one pretty simply, and I was able to get onto that one pretty easily. Now, this lower one was a little bit like the 80s in the Putang jungle, where you needed a candle and a treasure map to find what you were looking for. I had to take my fingers and stick them up underneath there so I could feel the tip of the head to be able to get my tool up in there, and then I was spinning it with my other hand, and I caught it. Not the drip drip of gonorrhea, the head of the bolt. Now, a lot of these bolts or screws, whatever you want to call them, you can get around to the back sides of there and put your fingers on them. On both sides of the lower ones, I definitely can get back here and do it. So I'm glad I waited to remove this after having the intake up. Okay, so now this is supposed to come up, which it does. And we got some coolant in there. And hopefully we'll be able to see where this thing is leaking at. Looks like our gasket's sealed down in there pretty good. It didn't even pop up with this. It's interesting. Now with it disassembled, we can see what the problem was. It was all leaking there. And we can tell that that is not look anything like this one. So we can replace all of this and hopefully fix the problem. Now that we've got this taken out, we're going to take some Scotch-Brite, clean up around here and around our gaskets there, etc., etc. Then we'll take dielectric and put our O-rings back in. Now I'm going to reuse the O-rings. I've done that several times. If you want to get new ones, you're more than welcome to, but luckily this is my car and I know how to work on it, so I can do it again if I had to, but I'm not all that worried about waiting a week to get these O-rings whenever they could get them. Just make sure you put some dielectric on there or some oil on these seals and they'll seal right up. Now for you cool cats out there that dropped your bolts and you can't seem to find them, all 8 of these bolts are 6mm by 1.0 pitch thread. They are overall length 32.5mm long. I recommend most local hardware stores here in the United States are only going to have 30 or 35. I recommend the 30mm because you don't want to blow the backs of these out. So I know 30mm will reach because they had a couple 5 to 10mm that they stuck out. And in here, I don't think it's going to matter a lot if you use the 35mm long one, but 30 will work there as well. Okay, one thing I forgot in my opening monologue here was the dielectric. This dielectric is going to go on these gaskets and it helps seal them up. Simple, just put it right on the rubber. Folks, please don't go down to AutoZone and get ripped off and buy this little teeny tiny tube for $1.99. This whole tube of dielectric, which comes in handy on just about everything, electrical connectors, everything, is about $5 to $6 and worth every penny of it. So do that on all of these and you'll have a nice seal. Now, the one main thing about reusing O-rings and gaskets and stuff like that, they're usually just fine as long as they're not tore or cut or something. But obviously you want to make sure these gaskets stay above the ridge so when you go to tighten them down, they don't leak. And I can tell you right now from experience, and it's a little bit over 2 decades, these gaskets won't leak because they're not tore, they're not cut, and they're not squished down. They will work, and I'll show you. Now, because I've been doing YouTube for about a decade now, I don't want to hear all your crap about, why didn't you just buy new gaskets from Land Rover? Well, not everybody's got as much money as you, so keep them comments to yourself. Now that we've got everything closed up and cleaned up and greased up, we can put it right down. Now listen, whenever you're starting bolts and there's one complete unit like this, do not tighten the bolts down, none of them, until you have all of them started, because you won't be able to move the component to get the bolts to start correctly. Now we'll tighten these down to torque and we should be good to go. Torque for old Clayboy is tight, not super tight, just tight. Okay, so this hose right here allows the air to escape that's trapped up underneath the thermostat waiting for it to open. So we want to make sure that this hose is not compromised during this procedure or compromised at the procedure. And as we can tell, this goes from larger to smaller. So this is a very particular hose. Try not to break it. Inspect all of your hoses. Make sure they don't have any tears or cracks in them. Now I'm going to go ahead and reuse my gaskets on here. I'm going to take some brake cleaner, clean them up just a little bit. And then I'm going to take that dielectric and I'm going to put it all over these things just so it makes a nice tight seal. Then at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how to check and make sure it's not leaking. Now we've got some dielectric on that gasket. We'll go ahead and pull out our paper towels. We've vacuumed it all up and put it back together. When you're putting this down, make sure that you have all your injector connectors and everything and nothing is underneath the intake, because when you go to tighten it down, you will break the connector and possibly crack or break your intake as well if something's underneath there. It needs to fit down flush against the bottom and not be lifted up or raised up. We also want to make sure that we have our thermostat connector, our temperature sensor connector sticking out of there. And if you took these knock sensors off of this, make sure that they're coming up out of there on this side as well. Also, we need to make sure that our coolant tube that comes from down there, which goes over the top of our throttle, is in the right position. And as we can tell, I don't have mine in the right position. It should be coming up from this hole right here. And because none of the connectors were affecting me putting in the bolts, with the exception of the rear main connector back here, I'm gonna go ahead and drop my bolts in. I plugged in all of my injectors. I'm gonna plug in the other connectors just to make sure I don't have anything underneath there before I go ahead and torque my intake down. Now, I want you to look up the torque specifications. The reason that I don't often give torque specifications in my videos is because I will get a bunch of knuckle dragging, mouth breathers, people that are really serious conversation starters when they leave the room telling me what I was wrong about the torque specs. So I just decided a long time ago, I'll let your ass look them up. No, nothing stinking changed. You need to start these bolts before you tighten them down. All 10 of them, they need to be started. Do not tighten or torque them down until you have all of them started, because you're going to go back and take them out. Okay, so now I've got every hose attached except for the upper radiator hose right here. Well, technically this goes down to the lower, but it's the upper on this side. This is actually the upper radiator hose right here. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna fill this up until coolant starts coming out of here and out of here. I've also not got this attached. And the reason for that is because the air is supposed to push up to here, because this is the highest portion of the cooling system. So technically speaking, we shouldn't see fluid out of here until everything else is full. And that's why I've got this off. But this is gonna push air, and after we start this vehicle and run it for a little while, we're going to have to just double check everything. Whenever you fill this, you always wanna have this open and fill it up to the line on the side of there where it indicates it. Now, just like at the beginning of the video, one of the first things we want to do is we want to add coolant. Now, I know I'm adding water to this. I didn't film me adding coolant to this hose. We want to add coolant to the hose, then put the hose back on, and also add coolant into our reservoir, filling it up to the proper line. Now I put about 2/3 of a gallon of coolant inside there, and now I can hook everything up and start filling this, start my vehicle, once I put my air filter and stuff back on it and see how she runs, and keeping our fingers crossed. But we're gonna go ahead and pressurize this system first once we have everything connected up, so you guys can see that I did this job correctly and there's no leaks, or at least I hope I don't look like a buffoon by reusing them gaskets. And I will be honest and show you if I have some leaks. Now, I've got my system full of coolant, and I filled it up just a little bit too tall, and I've got pressure on my system right where it's supposed to be. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna try to evacuate some of this air. Now, up here at the top of the throttle, this is a one-way check ball, meaning the fluid will travel this way, but it won't travel back this way. That is supposed to let the air out of it, is what I'm guessing. I've never read a book on this, don't know anything about it, but I know if I pressurize my system and I've got coolant in it, all I have to do is monitor it. This one's not as complicated as it looks up in here, folks. Looks like a bunch of hoses and wires that go everywhere, but it's actually pretty simple, pretty basic stuff. Now, if everything's working as it should, we should be able to see coolant passing back through here. And if it's not, it's a possibility that this check valve is bad, but as we look at this right here, we can notice that it goes down and comes back up. This is so it can allow the air to pass through the system and get rid of its own air into the tank. So we could leave the cap off of it, or just leave this loose and it'll bleed off the air. I don't know what the heck happened, but my tube is missing from here to here. I looked everywhere. I didn't move anything. It's like some kind of gremlin came and stole the damn thing. It bothered me the whole time I was editing this video. Okay, for some weird-ass reason, I couldn't find my stinking crossover pipe. I don't know where it went. It's ginormous. I don't think I could miss it any way, shape, or form, but we'll find it when we pick everything up. But I wanted to show you how to check and see if you have an intake leak. What you do is you take some brake cleaner and you spray it around your intake. And if your idle change is any different than normal, you have an intake leak. And in this situation, I certainly do not. So we're not worried about that. Now we're gonna run this thing around, make sure we got enough coolant in it, check all of our other fluids and everything, and we're pretty much good to go. I never did end up finding that stinking hose. I've lost screws and bolts and nuts and stuff like that, but I've never lost a 2-foot hose. I cleaned up my shop, everything, couldn't find it anywhere. I had no intention of making a 40-minute video when I started this, but I guess that's the time it took to show you all this information inside here, so whatever. If this video was helpful, please consider subscribing, clicking the notifications, sharing my videos, and give me them sweet old thumbs up.